And welcome to the Kaysville City Planning Commission meeting for June 27th, 2019. We will start with agenda item number 1, which is opening and recognition for outgoing Planning Commission members Betty Parker, Gary Bullock, and Thomas Wood.
Well, first of all, I want to just say thank you to all of you currently serving. Just watching some of your meetings, I feel your pain and understand the time and effort that you put into this. And it is because of the time and effort that you put in that Kaysville is the community that it is, and appreciate that you have sacrificed your time, and also your families have sacrificed their time as well. So thank you. I want to first have Gary Bullock come up. Gary has served from July 2010 to June 2019. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
All right. And then we have Betty Parker, July 2013 to June 2019. And something I've learned is once a planning commissioner, always a planning commissioner. It seems like our planning commissioners tend to stay involved, and I appreciate that. Thomas Wood, from January 2016 to June 2019. And soon there will be more planning commissioners coming your way, but I expect to see all of you continue to participate in our strategic planning process and affordable housing and everything that we're working on. Your expertise and your experience will come in handy, and so you're excused but not released. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And on behalf of Betty and Gary, we look forward to remaining involved with our community. May it be a little less formal, but we look forward to helping out whenever we can.
It gets in your blood.
It does kind of get in your blood.
Exactly.
Kaysville becomes our DNA, part of it.
Okay, item number 2, approval of the minutes from the meeting on June 13th, 2019. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'd move, but it wasn't here.
Oh, okay. I'll make Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the meeting on June 13th, 2019.
I'll second. Aye.
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 All right, I'm glad somebody was here that we could approve that.
We are too.
Okay, item number 3, a conditional use permit for a model home, design lab, and development sign at 2095 West, 200 North for Destination Homes.
All right, what we got there is they've been using it in the past year. It's a design home, they call it, and a model home. What they do is usually bring their clients in. It's a finished house, and then they can kind of fine tune and show their clients how they're going to turn out, see if they want to move things around, see any changes that they want to make while they're looking at a finished house. And they show their different dressings and their carpets and stuff. They've been using it for a full year. They want to continue using it. There hasn't been any complaints or anything from the residents around there. They feel it's in a good location, and they also have a development sign on premise. It's also been there for the full year, and they want to renew it for a year. They figure they'll be done about June of 2020 with pretty much the subdivision, and then that's when they're planning on pulling out and selling that. So Staff recommends that they approve with the conditional permit for the model and the design lab at 2095 West, 200 North for the period of 1 year or until all the lots and hill farms are sold, whichever is less.
All right, is the applicant here this evening?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Any discussion or questions? Seems pretty straightforward. The 1-year extension, a lot of times we grant it 6 months at a time. I don't really see a problem necessarily with a 1-year extension. If anyone else feels the same way, if we can have a motion.
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we grant a conditional use permit for model home, design lab, and development sign for Destination Homes at 2095 West, 200 North for an extended period of 1 year.
I'll second.
Are we want to say, or until the lots are sold, whichever's less? I think that was in there.
Okay. Okay, or until all the lots of Hill Farm are developed or sold, whichever is less.
You still good with your second
I'll
on
still
that?
second.
Okay. Tammy?
Aye.
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 All right, thank you. Item number 4 is a conditional use permit for a model home for Destination Homes at 1994 West Orchard Harvest Drive.
Again, same thing. They've been using this for the last, since that phase 2, so 3 or 4 years. They like the location of that one. It's right in the middle, so they can use it. They don't want to start another one. They just would like to extend the use for this one for 1 more year too, without building or moving. And so they're just, staff recommends we allow them to use the same one again for 1 year at 1994 West Orchard Drive until all the lots of Hill Farm development are sold, or 1 year, June of 2020, whichever is less.
And I will just add, Mr. Chair and Commission, I received only 1 call on this one after we put up our sign and notices, and they were just curious what it was. They said, yeah, it hasn't been an issue, hasn't been a problem, so they, as a resident nearby, seemed to think it was a non-issue to continue its use.
All right, seems very similar to the last one. I'm guessing we don't have a whole lot of questions. Can we have a motion on this particular item then?
I'll go ahead and recommend that we give a conditional use permit for model home for Destination Homes at 1994 West Orchard Harvest Drive for 1 year or until all lots are sold.
Second. Aye.
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 All right, thank you. The next item, number 5, conditional use permit for a telecommunications tower for Rock Schucher, approximately 950 West Sportsplex Drive.
Okay, I'll introduce this one briefly, then the applicant is here that I'd invite probably to speak further and give a little more detail on the site. It was probably about a year ago, a little bit less, with this planning commission and ultimately the city council, that we adopted some changes to our cell tower ordinance. One of the big differences was that it allowed for some of these stealth tower considerations in town and where they may be located. So this will be the first one that we'll have dealt with. So this will be a good test on our ordinance and how well we did, and if we're seeing things that we're interested in or not. But with this, T-Mobile approached the city, probably it's been a few months now, about potentially locating a tower in the Barnes Park area. And so what's been proposed, let me skip around a little bit, so bear with me, is they're looking at the ball diamonds in Barnes Park. There's the northeast field. There's currently some tall light towers that light up the fields at night, is taking one of those out and replacing it with a tower. And so and I'll go into the details of that in the site here in just a second, but part of the consideration of the Planning Commission and the way our ordinance is set up is It's to encourage cell companies as they're putting in the equipment around the city to try and locate on existing towers first if there's any available. There are some towers over by just right off of I-15 and 200 North that I believe have an available spot on them. I probably ought to have the number. I think it's a little over half a mile between the current site that's being considered and those towers. So I'll let the applicant speak to why they're still hoping to go in this specific location. They have provided, and I'll let him speak to this again, a coverage map showing what some of the existing coverage looks like in the area. And you can see barely, probably better in your packet there, a little green dot where that new tower is proposed and how that helps improve their coverage. So with this on site, they've been working with where the city controls the park. I've met out there a handful of times in our parks department and entertaining the consideration of what might be acceptable in particular to parks and the function of the park and the aesthetic of the park. And so that it gets to continue to be part of your consideration this evening. But ultimately the pole that would be removed is the second pole in on this northeast ball diamond. Right now the pole kind of sits in the middle of the sidewalk. It's about 70 feet in height. That pole would be removed and there would be an equipment pad built behind the sidewalk, so it would clear that up. And within that there'd be room for equipment to serve at least 2 users on the site. It's about a 25 by 40 pad, so it's fairly large, but the size that would be needed to accommodate multiple users. Working with the parks, they talked about using bricks and colors and things that match some of the other buildings and things within the park. And you can see ultimately the tower that's under consideration. It's 90 foot to the peak, and so that's the maximum height permitted as a stealth tower. Ultimately, there's T-Mobile would take the top spot. It's showing a second user on there, which we don't have at this time, but just simply that there's space for that. And then the fixture you see below that would be lights for the ball diamond. So it would replace and continue to function as that. So with this as a conditional use, we have some criteria that are included in the staff report that the Planning Commission can consider. And again, as it's new, I put them in here, so bear with me as I kind of just read them here with you. But the following shall be considered by the Planning Commission for conditional uses. Compatibility of the proposed structure with the height and mass of nearby existing buildings, location of the antenna in relation to existing vegetation, topography, ridge line structures and buildings to attain best visual screening, and installation of, but not limited to curb, gutter, sidewalk, landscaping, and fencing for the purpose of blending the site with the surrounding environment and providing screening for the tower and associated equipment. And that's under item 7. So all the cable, just by standard, would be put in interior already, be designed to our certain engineering standards with the 150 mile VOLT wind speed that we require. Should they receive a conditional use approval from the Planning Commission, it still does need to go before, the city's been working with them, but the City Council to finalize some contracts and things as we're continuing to work on this as the city's end. So the Planning Commission gets to be the first stop to see what you think of the site and the aesthetic and how you believe it works there within the area. Staff, again, having worked with the Parks Department in particular, is recommending approval of the design as proposed, with the condition essentially that it be built to our 150 mile an hour VOLT wind standard. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair and the commission, and again, remind you that the applicant is here to give additional details.
All right, thank you. Why don't we invite the applicant to come up? If you could state your name for us, please.
Rock Schucher. I live in Holiday, Utah.
Thank you. Is there anything that you'd like to add to what Lyle has explained to us before we ask you questions or discuss anything?
A couple of things. I might take just a half a minute.
That's fine.
And echo my thank you for the outgoing commissioners and those that are staying, I get a chance to go to a variety of jurisdictions, not only in this state, but in many states. And I don't often get a chance to say thank you, but thank you. It's a great example for all of us to step it up and do our part in our own community. So we appreciate your service. This is kind of a twofold thing for the city. It does meet the standard that has been developed under the new Telecommunications Act, and so it's a new cell tower in the park. It's also a lease to the city, so the city will get the initial revenue, plus in the document, as soon as the tower is erected and the contract is accepted, the tower will revert to the city. So not only the T-Mobile revenue, but all future revenue will go to the city. And so T-Mobile will only be a user at that point. There's a provision to move the existing lights to the new pole, and I believe it's Musco Lighting, and the city's well familiar with working with them. So everything is kind of status quo. The tree canopy is about 70 feet close to that tower location. So we're going to be about 20 feet above the tree canopy. As you know, RF frequencies are line of sight, so you do have to be above clutter. So that's why we are proposing the 90 feet, the full height that is allowed. T-Mobile, again, would take the top spot, and a future carrier would take the second spot, and it would still be a good spot at 80 feet. So I'm glad to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Questions for the applicant or discussion?
I think he answered, the one I had was where it's on city property, if there's going to be some sort of compensation or license agreement for that, but it sounds like if the city's going to be able to collect some of the revenue from the users on that, then...
Yeah, we've received a proposal. It's yet to be approved by the city council, but that's the discussion and direction that we're considering.
Question that I would have, who takes care if Clearfield or Kaysville owns the tower, who is going to maintain the tower?
Yeah, so I'm probably going to misquote some of the details of the lease, and Mr. Schucher probably can help me on that, but where the city owns it, there'd be some responsibility and maintenance on the city for portions of that. I think the equipment itself, if I recall correctly, it goes on the user, but the pole is the city's in this scenario.
So it going forward, it's still a light tower. It happens to have antennas on it, but it's still a light tower. The city's already maintaining light towers around the ball field, so that doesn't change. I can guarantee that this light tower will withstand far more than any of those other light towers that are there. So as far as any danger going forward, I think that would be very nil. But they're built to withstand a lot of things and last for a long period of time.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I was just wondering, who pays for the uninstallation and reinstallation of those lights for the tower? Is that, do the city people do it, or?
I think T-Mobile
will pay for that.
Pay for the installation of the tower, drill the footing, stand the tower, put all the antennas up, and be prepared to pay for, if not install the lights. I would recommend that Moscow installs the lights and just charges T-Mobile. But there's an enclosure, a block enclosure around the ground equipment. It's big enough to handle 2 carriers, and it matches everything that's out there in the park, and it's very durable, very long-term construction.
And that Musco, or that company, is currently the company the Parks Department uses. Its lighting specialist on how to get the diamonds right, so you're not getting all the shadows and things that you don't want. So, and that's where we would consider using them on the dime of the builder.
Okay, thanks.
Is this the first tower that we've done?
Yeah, other than our monopole. So yeah, again, the previous ordinance said you had the 120-foot towers, 3 users, and not in this location, but we'd heard in other locations potentially some interest, and I think the city was, in a discussion with the planning commission, felt we could get better product and better towers to continue the coverage that we're seeing. And yeah, this is the first one since the passing of that ordinance in these other areas in this type of structure. So it states specifically within the cell tower ordinance, in the cell tower ordinance, excuse me, that get up here to the language. Apologize. So that, because it does define what can be considered stealth, so that somebody didn't make an argument that a cactus is stealthy in Kaysville, and the replacement of an existing light pole or power pole, utility pole, I think might be the actual language, was something that was specifically stated as a potential consideration for a stealth tower. So in this case, where you had a tall pole, put another one in its place, clearly it's not an exact replica of what used to be there, but hopefully that helps reduce some of the impact. And so yes, this is the first one. I'm going to try and find that language for you, Commissioner.
If I could say something else about our industry, and the city will notice this more and more going forward. When you build a footprint of cell towers, you're trying to take care of so much traffic in each area and be able to hand off all those calls. As time goes on, each site, the capacity runs out. You can only get so many smarter and faster antennas with technology changes. Eventually, you have to reach out. So this site is not only a capacity site, but it's an expansion site. So its capacity to hand off traffic from across the freeway, because that site is saturated, and so it's going to take some of that traffic. It's going to improve the coverage in that immediate area of the park. So you're going to run into capacity issues going forward. All the carriers are having this problem, so you'll see that a lot.
Just one more question. So the base of it is 25 feet by 40 feet. How tall is it? I may have missed that.
Yeah, that base is a walled enclosure, 25 by 40.
So is it like 8 feet tall, or how tall is that?
6 feet.
6 feet, okay.
And it's attractive king-size brick just to match the existing buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Lyle, I'm kind of curious. So number 10 on this, under the ordinance, those really don't apply then if the city owns the tower, right? So,
Yeah, so I guess that's debatable if we need to do our own document to verify to ourselves that we're willing to take out obsolete equipment.
okay.
But yeah, that's procedurally what we're looking for, and this is something that's just stuck around with the old ordinance and got beefed up a little bit, but in the event that there's a tower that's technology's changed, it's no longer in use, and it's obsolete, we have similar language with signage. If it's no longer being used, so it supports function,
Yeah.
we want insurance that it's going to go away.
So then the city is responsible for those things.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, on the same list, I honestly can't remember if these are relics of the old ordinance or if they're part of the new one. I think they're part of the new ordinance, the revised ordinance, but number 7, we have to look at these 3 things. You know, so one, is the height and mass compatible with nearby existing buildings and utility structures? I think there's less of a concern with that element, in my opinion, given the location. It's kind of in the business park. There's not a lot of residences around, really any residences around in the near vicinity. You know, it's I guess arguable that it could be seen, but I think it could be absorbed with what surrounds there, in my opinion, on that first one. The second one, I have a question related to that. talking about location in relation to existing vegetation, topography, including ridge lines, which I think is probably sort of a visual thing. But the vegetation, will any, looks like there might be at least one tree that's lost with this. Is that correct? How many trees would you lose?
I agree there might be one. I haven't, we just recently ordered a survey to make sure we know exactly what trees might be affected. There might be one or two, and T-Mobile is very happy to replace trees close by, so we can replace and make the city on even ground that way. But there would be, the right tree is probably the one that is most likely to be affected.
Oh, I would have said the middle one, but, so you're saying that right one maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. And then sort of a related question to that is, what was the logic of putting it on this light pole as opposed to any of the other ones around the field?
That's a RF engineer decision. It's line of sight, and again, it's handing off traffic from another site, so the proximity is important. But the farther we go north or west, the worse the coverage is for this site. So this was the optimum pole for the location. It turned out we proposed a different pole initially, and then when we got to looking at it, the Parks Department liked this place best, and then after we looked at it, we agreed. It was actually better. So
probably for lighting, possibly, or? Because I look at it and go, if you moved it, 40 or 50 feet to the other side, you might not have to take any trees out, but if it's a lighting issue too to the field.
There may be a portion of that. I hope I get it accurately. So when we visited with the Parks Department, there's a light approximately, I don't know if you can see my little cursor on here, this edge of the ball diamond, and you have this, and then they just kind of space evenly from there. So we looked primarily at maybe 3 or 4 lights around that arc and other locations in the park. The Parks Department, like this one in particular, based on some of the screening and coverage that surrounding trees provided and just kind of the ambience and aesthetic that it would help maintain within the park, but also some of its proximity for maintenance, future access. So if you get too deep on the other side, it gets hard to bring utilities over the creek or to get over there to it. We have power up in the street on that to the north, and for those reasons, in short, and I think even the tree discussion, my recollection from the Parks Department, there are certain trees in there that they look forward to replacing over time, including those right here in close proximity. They mentioned to me, and it sounds like T-Mobile is willing to cover the cost to some extent. They like to have total control over where the trees go and when and how they're planted and which species and variety. They're very, very particular here in the park. So, should the commission feel that there's need for more, I don't think that's inappropriate, but you might leave it more open-ended to have the owner or the city perhaps come back to the commission with additional details, or leave it open-ended to just simply state plant additional trees to provide additional screenage.
I mean, in my opinion, on 7.2, if we're trying to say what are the detrimental impacts, and we're going to lose one or two trees, I think that's a detrimental impact, and we try to mitigate that by requiring 1 or 2 trees to be planted. And I would suggest, and I don't know if we need to put this as a condition, I would suggest a tree that is going to be at a mature height of 70 feet, so it's not going to take over the height of the pole, but if there's other trees that are mature that are at that same height, do the same thing, just to soften the screening. And then number 3, I don't know that this one entirely applies, other than maybe the block wall as opposed to sort of a chain link fence wall, which I don't think is being proposed. I think, again, the location of it, it's not as concerning as if it were closer to a residential area. So number 3, I guess, is not as much of a concern, but that's my opinion. So on those 3 things.
I got a question on number 8. Cable shall be installed on the interior of any monopole. How are those secured? We don't have cables coming from it. The structure itself supports it against that 150-mile-an-hour wind, right?
Yes, it does. And what you will see, a clean pole with cables on the inside. You won't see the cables on the inside. They come out at the bottom. There's a top port that gets cables to distribute to the antennas. There's a bottom port that gets it to the ground equipment. But you won't really see anything but some small loops of cable at the antenna position. So.
Yeah, occasionally you'll find older towers where essentially the cable from the antenna equipment down runs on the exterior. So it's not a supporting cable, but essentially HDMI type or fiber type cables that are coming from those antenna down, and we want them hidden.
So I have just a general question. So the reason that we can't use the existing towers is just because it's not an optimal, they're not in optimal locations for you?
Yes, a half mile away.
Makes a difference.
Doesn't help our coverage plot that Lyle put up there. It doesn't hand off nearly as well either. So we lose what we gain by putting it there to increase the coverage in the park, and we don't hand off nearly as well.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll make mention just for the consideration of the commission. I think I saw him come in, so we put up a notice, and it looks like we have a neighboring property owner that would probably be most impacted if there's interest from the commission on hearing from them that's in attendance.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant while we have him up here? We may call you back up, but why don't you go ahead and have a seat, and if you'd like to, the neighbor would like to come up and make a couple comments, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much. My name's Aaron Rasmussen. We own the property just to the north there of the park. I've been a property owner there since the park was established in the late 1990s for over 30 years. Recently just did a significant development just to the north of that on our property that we appreciate the support of the city on. We're very concerned about the tower. From our perspective, if you come over the overpass at 90 feet high, it'll be very, very visible in the park. You know, our buildings are approximately 30 feet high, give or take. You're talking 90 feet high, that's going to stand out above the canopy and everywhere else. We also, in our buildings, built them with the park and the views in mind. Offices, conference rooms, other things that we use. We bring in people from all over the country for our national tenants. They look out the park, they love it. They speak very highly of it. They say the campus we have is probably one of the, all over the country, it's probably the nicest setting we have. They would look out now where the tower is located, and they look out our conference room, they look out our second-story windows, right into a cell tower. I don't think that's reflective of the park, the intent we have to encourage business development and the atmosphere we want to present. I'd recommend we look at other locations. That's our perspective on it. Whether it's a residential or business, we're still property owners in the park, and I think have a vested interest in it. I would like to think we could find hopefully another location that would meet their requirements and work well for T-Mobile. But I think it's detrimental to our property, the values we have, and I'm not supportive of it.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here and offering that for us. Thoughts, questions?
Well, right now there's a 70-foot pole, correct?
Yeah, I believe it's 70 feet in height.
How many 70-foot poles do we have there? Because there's several lights, correct? You said one. That diamond had 5
They're
or
about
6?
4 or 5 per diamond. I mean, I can
Okay.
find out more specifically, but each diamond has multiple around the perimeter. And yeah, with the, let me get you a different maybe perspective, just to look at them, if you'll come with me in Google Earth. So not exactly the same as being on site, but let's see if we can find some, if you'll entertain a 30-second tour.
While you're doing that, what's the size of the lot? Is it like 5,000 square feet?
The equipment pad, so it's a 25 by 40, so is that roughly 1,000 feet in size? And the sizing, again, is to house the equipment that both takes care of. So this is the neighboring business to the north that Mr. Rasmussen represents and owns the property on. So, depending on the time of year, you don't always have all the foliage on the trees, and this is Google Earth, so you take it with a grain of salt what you can see, but you can see one of the light towers here. The one that's being proposed,
To the left.
I think, is just left of it here, and we may not be able to see it. But each ball diamond, I think it's, I'm going to say 4 to 5 light posts are around each one of those. And
So we've already got them, so it's probably, I'm guessing, probably not so much the height, it's only 20 feet higher, it's probably the canopies from the antennas that is more of a concern, I'm guessing, because 20 more feet of a pole's not that intrusive, but canopy is probably more of what I'm guessing is a concern.
It could be some of each, maybe depending on where you're looking at it from, it may be more exposed than other angles.
How tall is the one off of Angel and 200?
Angel and 200 is a 120-foot tower.
Okay.
I believe, possibly without exception, our towers are all 120 feet within the city. So again, you've got height limitation in the surrounding areas at 35 feet in that light industrial zone. So you're roughly 3 times that with a 90-foot post. But yeah, it is 30 feet taller than our other towers if you can visualize those and how large they are.
So with this being a conditional use, and as we know with the requirements that exist in state code and then in our ordinance, the requirements that we have in ordinance, if they meet the requirements, then we're pretty much obligated to approve. We don't really have a lot of discretion in turning it down unless we've determined that it cannot meet some of the requirements without mitigation, or that can't be mitigated. So this item number 7, Lyle, I guess those are items that we consider in approving the conditional use.
Yeah, so I would say to the request, just as you stated, per state code, if we've listed it as a conditional use, it's essentially something we permit with conditions, and so we're looking at those mitigating factors. So I would think the Planning Commission's task this evening is to look at the mitigating factors and how it might work. However, to the concerns that are out there, again, the city still has yet to fully approve contracts and that portion, and that is something that the City Council could consider, and whether or not.
Yeah, that's a much more discretionary
Yes.
decision that they have.
So I think there are some relevant concerns, and I think there's representation from the council here as well, and when that goes before them, we'll make sure you're aware of it, that could be a consideration on their end, but I think this particular body is much less discretionary, much more strict on what you're looking at.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say with the conditional use, I mean, by allowing these as a conditional use, we've in essence said in ordinance that we will allow the towers in these locations, and we may only just look at some of these factors and to mitigate. I think we're going to be really hard pressed to find any reason to turn it down from our level, from the conditional use side of it. There may be some things that we can do to require to mitigate, and it sounds like we've talked about a little bit of some of those. But I don't know that we really, I do know, I don't think we really have discretion to turn it down. To Mr. Rasmussen's issue, I think his consideration maybe is more with the City Council with regard to whether they even ought to enter into this lease or not.
That would be my feeling on it, and perhaps it's cart before the horse. It's tricky where there's multiple approvals on this that the city's got to do. We felt that, at least I felt it was appropriate to fine tune it to see what might be acceptable through the Planning Commission and conditional use before the city then considers whether or not they're willing to approve the lease on it and those final details. So, but yes, you're correct. We may not be able to eliminate the impacts. In fact, the only way to do that may be to not have the pole. So you're simply mitigating for them with factors that I think have been appropriately discussed, and we would look for a decision from that angle.
Yeah, it's good points, because I looked through it, it meets item number 1, meets number 2, number 3, number 4, with it being stealth, it says that it'll be painted or blend in with the surroundings. We already talked about 7, Josh did.
Mhm.
We talked about 8.
Mhm.
9 and then 10 is really kind of dealing with the city. Well, they'll take some of the maintenance responsibilities of it, so you're right. We're pretty much obligated based on the ordinance and the conditions, parameters we're in.
I mean, just correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you're saying is, and I believe this is an administrative decision. It's not a legislative decision.
Right.
Legislative, we have all kinds of discretion.
Right.
This, we have limited discretion.
Right.
And so which I agree with. I guess, and to make an attempt to address the concern, what I heard from Mr. Rasmussen basically was visibility, the views, and that relates, I think, to the height. On one hand, I'm not sure that it can be entirely eliminated unless you totally move it somewhere else. I understand that point. And I guess one question I have to try to mitigate that a little more than what we may have already discussed is, and this might be a question for the applicant, I think we've already answered, or I think we've already asked it, but let me just ask it again. So this is where we've decided upon it, and I'm not a cell tower engineer, but would it be possible, and I don't even know if Mr. Rasmussen would think this would help, but if it was over here, on a light pole over here, it's further away, it's not as maybe obtrusive for the views out of these buildings, is it possible to come over here, and would that work for the engineering of the tower?
I'll speak to that while Mr. Schucher's coming up, if he's got additional detail. I know as we've met with the T-Mobile and Mr. Schucher in consideration of this, they were, I believe, very set on the furthest north and east in this area as possible. And so we looked at multiple options around this area, and as he stated, they've found one that seemed to work for both parks and for them. We've not explored these other areas from the city, specifically at least the Parks Department, although I don't know that would be necessarily problematic. But those that were explored were based on the RF engineers' target area in that northeast side.
So I guess maybe to just put a finer point on my question, would it change what you're trying to accomplish drastically enough if you just mirrored this light pole over to this? I'm assuming there's one in the same place over here. Would that make it not feasible for what you need?
It would, yes. Again, these locations are RF engineering driven.
Explain what that means.
Well, it means that if we're dropping calls, what's the best way to not drop calls? So we find the location that is the best location to handle the most traffic and increase coverage in that location. So yes, the other end of the park does not work for T-Mobile.
So I guess, maybe I just am not informed enough, but it seems like, that's probably 200 yards. 200 yards makes that much of a difference?
No, it's quite a bit more than that.
From right there to right there is more than 200 yards?
Yeah.
How? Okay, 300 yards.
Well,
That's a short par 4 or less, I'm telling you. So I guess if that truly does make that much of a difference, then that's information that I personally would like to know. But if it doesn't make that much difference, then I think it could help mitigate a detrimental impact and still allow it to function. But I understand what you're telling me.
yeah, our application is for the other area. It's not for anything south.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're considering today. If I might share a photo with the commission. This is what we tend to see, and you can pass that around. That's what you tend to see with a cell tower with antennas at the top.
Do you know what the height of that is?
That's probably 80 feet. This is the cell tower. Now this is an ugly tower here, but the one in front of it is comparable to what we'd be doing, except the reverse. The antennas would be at the top, and the lights would be below. And these antennas are closely mounted to the tower. And that's what we would propose here. We would mount them as close as we can, but keep in mind there's 9 antennas that go around there, so we have to have the space. But it's nothing like that big array in that drawing there.
Now,
It's much closer.
what color? Because that's one of the things we addressed and talked about when we redid this ordinance. And I thought that was kind of the definition of stealth. And it says number 4, the color shall be reviewed and approved on a case-by-case basis by the planning commission. You know, so it'd be painted to blend in with the surroundings. So what are you proposing? Because I guess we've got to look at that too. We've got to approve what color that's going to be.
Yeah, so the current the current proposal in our consideration was to match the towers that are on site, so just the steel gray look,
The light
without a
towers
specific color on it.
The existing cell towers?
The existing
Poles.
light towers,
Yeah.
light poles, so just to match, and so it's just that exposed gray steel look without a paint over it specifically.
I might be the odd man out on this, but it seems like literally this is lipstick on a cell tower pig. Because if you paint it a certain color, sometimes it draws more attention to it. You know, I don't know how to. Do you paint it green low where the trees are, and then blue high? I don't know. That just seems like it might get into a rainbow-colored pole, or more of a pole that's more obvious than one that's just a color that blends
palm
it.
tree look.
Yeah.
Well, and once you paint it, you always paint
Maintain
it.
it.
You have to
And
maintain
Then
it
you have to paint, yeah,
perpetually.
that's right.
You have to paint it
If
regularly.
I may, the light towers are all galvanized steel, and that's what this tower would be. And it is by far the most acceptable, least obtrusive looking tower that you can build. We've painted towers every color you can imagine, and they're all ugly. The galvanized steel is the best look, and it kind of goes away a little bit in the sky. Cell towers are always uglier than not having them, for sure. But if we want coverage and we want to use our phones, it's one of the necessary evils.
Well, that's all I was asking, if it was proposed to do anything different, or if that's what it was, so.
Josh, I'm just wondering what impact you're thinking of mitigating by moving it to the south end. What do you think that it mitigates?
Well, I'm not convinced that it mitigates it at all or much, but I'm just trying to address the concern that we heard from Mr. Rasmussen about the visual impact. And if, again, it doesn't take it away, but if it's farther away from these users, maybe it's lessened. Maybe the visual impact is lessened.
Do you think that would, Mr. Rasmussen, or does it make a difference?
I think it makes a huge difference,
Do you?
because if you
Moving
look
it
at the
that far
business
away.
park, most of your users are in that corner. You come down the road, they're all in that northeast corner. To be on the southwest side, where you've got parking lot that's back off the road and not right in front of windows and doors for businesses, I think is a much better location. I don't love the idea of a cell tower in a park. I don't think your average person expects cell towers to be in a park. They expect lights, but they don't expect cell towers. To me, cell towers should be where you already have high-profile power poles or other things like you have already, where you come over the freeway there on 2nd North and right to the left, back behind the United Mechanical, you've got a cell tower. No one objects to it. It's out of the way. It's not visible. This is very visible to me regardless, but I just don't think people, when they look at a park, expect to see cell towers in a park. In general, I think it's just not a common thing. Just like you expect a business park to be full of businesses, you expect a park to be a park, not a business entity. That being said, from my perspective, relative to our concerns, having that tower in a different location in the park would make a huge difference.
So different location, you're suggesting anything south or south?
If you ask me, the southwest corner or south would be far less obtrusive relative to their traffic and what the business owners would see in that park.
Okay.
Because there's a parking lot. If you scroll down, there's a parking lot
Right.
right
Yeah.
there and open space, and so you're not having people in offices or business facilities looking out windows into that tower.
You know, to your comment, though, of the nature of the park, we don't expect cell towers in a park, but we have a ball field in this park that already has more than a dozen 70-foot towers. So an additional tower that's an extra 20 feet
But they're-
is almost kind of
yeah.
expected. Once you're looking at a ball field and you're seeing tower, 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 it seems like it would sort of blend into now one would stand out and go, gee, that's a weird one. Why is it higher than the rest? But it's not a typical park. It's not, you know, if you remove the ball fields, then yeah, a tower in the middle of a park would be very odd. But
But if you look at
We're
the
already used
park,
to
the
seeing
canopy of
them.
those trees hide a lot of those lights from the road. They're 70 feet, your lights are 70 feet, you're talking 20 feet higher, which is almost the, 30% within 30% of the height of our buildings. And then you've got the canopy of that cell tower on top. People will see it.
You know,
That's-
I come back
This
to
is-
what the ordinance says and what we're allowed to do. One of the things in here, cell towers no more than 800 feet closest to residential district. And I think that was kind of derived from that one on 200 North and Angel. But it doesn't talk about location to office buildings or industrial buildings, flex buildings, things of that nature. And I understand what we're saying, because we live by the other one that's 120 feet tall, and we see it, but I go through here, and in my mind, I feel legislatively and by what we have before us that I don't know how we can, me personally, I'm looking at them going meets. I can't find a way to get away from it. So I think that you're coming earlier that it's probably a legislative versus administrative is probably the way to go.
I have a question, Lyle. How much recommendation can we make, or will to, as far as, height, and can we make a recommendation with our,
So,
as we
in-
pass this along?
yeah, that's, if I'm getting the question correctly, so you are the final deciders
Yeah, we're the-
on the
Oh, wait,
condi-
oh, right, that's right.
on the
okay.
conditional use portion of
Right,
this,
that's
right?
right,
So
I forgot, okay.
you're not making a recommendation on that. I would say likely the council will be aware of this conversation and some of the
Okay.
concerns that have come up.
That's true, okay.
So in some of that sense, maybe there's some unofficial recommendations as to concerns or issues with it there. But regarding the height, as you consider that, again, we're looking at those criteria, I guess that would be the compatibility regarding height and mass with the structures, trees, buildings in nearby proximity. If you interpret that to mean that height is an issue on it and there's reason to change that as part of a mitigating factor, I believe that could be a consideration, but it is specifically allowed to be as tall as 90 feet as well.
So I'm opening up an invitation to any one of you to explain how you would explain this. So number 7.2, let me just read it in a way that I think makes sense for my question. The following shall be considered by the Planning Commission for conditional uses. Number 2, location of antenna in relation to existing buildings to obtain the best visual screening. So that we've heard what I believe is a detrimental impact,
Right.
and that's the height relative to existing buildings. So what are we doing to address or mitigate that detrimental impact?
No, I agree with you. I think we do have the discretion to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was kind of asking the questions about, what the thought was with regard to location and so on, and where the thought, at least from some, is that would help. I think it's something that we could legitimately consider, is the location and moving it.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think moving it mitigates that impact, as we've just heard.
Yeah.
Now, some may not agree, and maybe the existing where it is and trees and stuff, it's not an impact. But I believe that it sounds like it is, and I think we have the discretion to impose a condition that mitigates it. And I think the condition would be moving it. Now, let me talk out of the other side of my mouth. The problem is the the applicant's saying that doesn't work engineering-wise.
Right.
And
Yep.
I don't know if, I guess I have to trust him at his word, but I'm not entirely convinced, right? That's, I
Well, and
mean,
it might be worth finding out, and I don't know if the applicant can tell us, how much of a difference does it make?
yeah,
Is it a big difference? Is it not a lot of difference? I don't know.
yeah.
Would it move a lot further out of the park? I mean, I tend to agree with,
Yeah.
you know, I go down there a lot, and I don't know if I'm ready to see cell towers here and there, if there are, so.
I agree. I was just going to ask on the height. The height absolutely has to be 20 feet higher in order for it to work.
That's the ordinance.
Oh, wait a second. Okay, just a second.
We're limited to 90.
We're limited, okay, gotcha.
Actually, isn't it 120?
It's up to, isn't it up to 120?
Oh, we can't go.
It can't exceed.
It can't exceed
Can't exceed
120.
120, so he's,
Okay.
So the minimum is 90 in our ordinance? Where's that?
No,
I don't
I
think
think,
there's a minimum.
I think,
There's
yeah,
a max.
max.
City,
Right.
state can have-
There's a, so I'm just saying, could it be shorter?
And respond to that, and again, it's RF driven, and 90 feet is what they're looking for. It doesn't make any sense to put in a shorter pole and deal with tree clutter, because line of sight gets influenced by the tree clutter, you lose integrity on the signal. So you have to be above the clutter.
Okay.
Let me just clarify a couple other things. Far and away, there are more cell towers on schools than anywhere. Schools get more cell towers than any other place. The second place is business parks. Business parks and industrial parks get the second most. And community parks get the third most. If you drive through any park, in any good-sized park in northern and southern Utah, you will see cell towers. That's where we put them. And that's where you have people, that's where you need phone coverage, and that's why they're there. So glad to answer any other questions
I
on
think
that.
we've also, height-wise, because when we did the ordinance, some of the amendments to it was we wanted to be able to cluster and have multiple things on it in order to get multiple people, so we reduce the number of cell
Usage.
towers. You almost
Exactly.
got to go higher to reduce those numbers, so we've,
Okay.
by basically mandating that, saying that we've got to be able to put multiple ones on it, we've almost caused a situation that creates taller poles.
So the question I've got for you is, you're saying that that's the best location from what your engineers tell you, and at 90 feet, that works.
Yes.
If it were moved, would it work if the tower were higher?
Well, I'm trying to remember what's below there. You all know better than I do. I know there's a gas station and some other things off to the right as you come off 200 North. So if you move it from the north and put it to the south, you move it out of one view and put it in somebody else's
Sure,
view.
yeah.
So I'm not sure what that does. But I'm sympathetic. It's always a trade-off.
Yeah.
And nobody really wants these in their backyard unless you get the revenue, and then everybody wants them.
Well, I mean,
Oh, go ahead.
if you, I mean, I was thinking the same way as Wilf was, and again, I'm exploring this, I'm not sold one way or the other, but if you, let's say you moved it to, you mirrored it and you moved it over to here, but you raised it, let's say hypothetically, I'm not saying we would do this, but let's say you raise it to the maximum height, 120 feet. Now that, I mean, you could correct me if I'm wrong, that would give the city more room for more users and more revenue.
But how close does that put it to the home there? It's got to be within 800 feet, and we got a house right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
So
And
if we-
especially, yeah.
We move it west or south, you run into that issue.
And that would be, with the height discussion, more a legislative decision again, because monopoles are not permitted in the park, I don't believe. But stealth poles are, and a stealth pole is a 90-foot height limitation.
There's not-
Oh,
So-
90. Oh,
Go
got
for
it.
stealth.
There it is.
That's the limitation in the parks?
On stealth poles.
Oh, on stealth poles. Oh.
And is this considered part of the industrial park?
And it is part of the industrial park, so that's one of the other steps that the council is going to have to look at when it's before them, is some of the covenants of the park as
So
well
then
as
it
the
is
contract.
limited to 90, not the 120.
But as a public use property, that only stealth towers are allowed on public use properties,
I see.
not monopoles. And so that was part of the change within the ordinances. We created this new type, but we also limited where they could go and how they could go. So Commissioner Bullock is correct. I don't know the distance on that home. I could look at it real quick.
Okay, no, but that's.
So I know we're talking hypotheticals, but, and perhaps that's the right answer. I'm not saying it's not, but it becomes a legislative decision at that point as to, are we going to change the ordinance to permit that type of tower?
On park
Correct.
property. Yep, okay.
So could it go over in here somewhere? 'Cause
Yes, it could be closer to, what is that, 900 West or
Right in there.
Kaysville Drive? Yeah, it can go closer in there. Our original request was right at the dumpster location where the volleyball courts are.
Oh, right over there?
That was our original request. I don't know if that gets far enough away from you.
Part of the situation is that that location that you're asking for right now happens to be directly across from the big windows of the conference room and the big offices. So even moving it a little bit to the west or moving it a little to the south would help eliminate the fact that it's
So if it goes right there.
there from the prime.
Yeah, we would be moving, if we went back to our original proposal, we would be moving it to the east, not the west.
And then, and we may have the same concerns with the neighbors to the east, though, that you've got to the north.
I thought that was commercial over there, no?
Those buildings are different. Those are single story.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Okay.
Way too big windows on that west side.
I mean, splitting the difference between all of it, you go to the light pole over on the west, go up a little bit and over to the, no.
Here.
I'm trying to
East and
direct traffic.
west.
Right here
Second
splits the
base.
difference between, I'm assuming there's a light pole right here.
Okay.
That splits the difference between all of them, but again, that's further than here. That's like a 9-iron from right over there.
For you, it's a driver for me.
So Lyle, do you know why the city's having them put it there rather than where they originally requested it?
Yeah, so when we walked the site to consider the original request, let's go for a walk again. Please let me know if this is not helpful, but there was concern from the Parks Department is its visibility from the street. And so they're sensitive, I think they'd take or leave having the equipment in the park at all in some respects, but one of the reasons the locations and areas that were looked at had to do with the aesthetic and visibility. So as much as people use the park, even more people drive the perimeter of the park. So some of the sites that were originally considered were just right off of K Drive here, the volleyball court, the parking lot, perhaps using a pole here or the light standard in the middle of the volleyball. And it was the Parks Department's opinion that that was too present, too visible, and undesirable. They liked it being hidden back
And it wouldn't be
behind
stealth.
trees further to the west.
It wouldn't be stealth if it was over there. It wouldn't have to be stealth.
It would arguably be much less stealthy.
But I
It
mean,
would
you could
still,
go 120 because it wouldn't be connected to the pole.
so
Is that right?
it would still have to, because it's within the zoning district, the PU zone.
Okay.
We don't allow the 120-foot monopole.
Got it.
So it would have to replace a post to qualify for the stealth or function as such. So that's where the conversation shifted to this ball diamond, where it was within that. Again, we haven't looked at the other three.
I think this spot
areas.
looks really good. That's an open spot, no trees. Like if you zoomed in on that. I mean, it's not a pole. The pole's right in here.
Yeah.
But that might be a compromise.
So the city council will be able to weigh how much revenue they're going to receive versus the impact that it has with the park.
Yeah, I think is the need truly there, that it provides enough service? Is the revenue worth it? Is the impact too much? Yeah, those are all things that they would have to take a look at.
I mean, in my opinion, I think the revenue question isn't, I mean, it's not really a detrimental impact because it would be revenue neutral. In fact, it would probably generate revenue. It would pay for itself and then some, is my guess. And so I think the visual is probably the biggest detrimental impact. I don't know.
Lyle, if we granted a conditional use permit, is it still contingent on the city having the agreement with T-Mobile, and could they potentially move it, or are we bound to, we've granted a conditional use permit for this exact spot, or can we grant it for somewhere in the park, subject to the city council's decision on where to put it in agreement with T-Mobile?
Yeah, great question. So let's see if I answer it. As the applicant stated, this is where they're interested in.
Yeah.
Ultimately, without the property owner's permission and contracts and things going forward, if the council doesn't want it, even if you approve it, it's possible that nothing happens if those other items can't be satisfied by both parties. So should your request be open-ended to that matter, again, it may not satisfy the applicant's needs, and they may not pursue it, and that may, I don't know that you are unable to make that decision to relocate the post to another site, or the tower to another site within the property. I think more appropriate is probably considering the request at hand. And
Yeah, I think we could approve it, saying that we would approve it anywhere in this area.
Okay.
You know, we could say we find that, you know, due to whatever considerations, but it would be acceptable to locate it anywhere within this area. And then it would be up to the council and the applicant to decide where to put it.
And if that swath that we're saying area does not include this location where it's being proposed, then we are essentially saying
Move it somewhere.
it can't be, well, what we're saying is we can't mitigate it where it's located. So we'd have to deny it almost. We would give them a suggestion. So it wouldn't even be, we'd have to say, I'm just thinking out loud. If that swath that we're talking about does not include its current location, what we're saying is where it's currently located, there's no conditions we can impose that would mitigate the detrimental impact. Where it would be mitigated is in this other area.
Yeah, no, I'd say the mitigation is moving it. That's the mitigation. It still works, just in a different location.
And I kind of get that too, but if I hear him what he's saying, if it doesn't work in that swath, then it doesn't. Then it doesn't work for him.
If that were the case, but it doesn't sound like that's the case.
Well, and it doesn't say that in here. It's not specific to where it would be, right? It's just conditional use for a tower.
I think the way I read the application is they're applying for this location, and so we have to say what are the impacts from this location, and can we mitigate them?
Okay.
And the applicants even stated that that's the location based on their engineering or they're looked at, so.
And I guess the first thing we have to really decide is, do we agree with Mr. Rasmussen that this is a significant impact to the building, and which is one of the considerations that we can make.
Yeah.
And this, is that a significant enough impact that we feel like it should be mitigated somehow? And then how would we mitigate it? Perhaps by moving it.
It's a good point.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I worked with Lyle on the new ordinance, and we had a little bit of input on that to help the city, and that was a year or so ago. And we approached the city intentionally because there was revenue. Whenever we can give a city revenue, that's what we do. We go there first as a first choice.
Oh, yeah.
And parks are pervasive with antennas. So we didn't think it was anything unusual. If we went across Kaysville Drive, is that zoned for 120? Could we put 120 across Kaysville Drive? Because that's a bigger tower. You'd end up with a
taller
bigger
one.
structure, more antennas. And really, with the clutter in the park, you don't see this as much as you might think. We get used to looking at miles and miles of power poles. We overlook them because we get used to them. So one cell tower is nothing like a transmission line, and they're all over the place.
Well, to me, 120 feet is a lot more intrusive than 90.
Yeah. So are we looking at number 3 then, where we're trying to be as unobtrusive as possible and minimize the impact? And I think, to me, the key here is unobtrusive as possible. We're not, and minimize it. We're not trying to get to zero impact. It's going to impact somebody.
Yep.
The Parks Department already has weighed in on this and said, we feel that this spot is too obtrusive and impacts too many people by having it, as we suggested, a little further east, closer to the volleyball, which is where you wanted it initially. And the Parks Department came back and said, this is too much. Move it here where they felt it's as unobtrusive as possible within the framework of what works for you. Clearly, if we put it over on the southwest side, that's again less obtrusive, minimizes the impact at least to one individual, but doesn't work for you. So to find a balance between what works for the carrier and what minimizes the impact for everyone, can we put it on the building right in the middle of everything and just shoot it straight up?
Not an option that we've considered, but potentially.
Sure, go ahead.
You say we're an individual, but we're a business entity, and we bring a lot of revenue to the city just as well. And I would appreciate if you consider that too. We have over 200,000 square feet of rentable space there that we bring tenants and companies into, and this impacts us. I mean, I'd rather see it on the back corner of my property behind my building than where you're proposing to put it.
Sure, come on up, just give us your name.
I'm Elizabeth Nielsen. Rasmussen is my maiden name. I'm also owner of that property. I'm all for finding win-wins, and I think there's a way, hopefully we can do it. I know you mentioned that you haven't looked at the other ball fields, and I believe, and I don't have my glasses on, Sunbluff?
That's
Josh?
yeah, sure.
Okay.
That works, yeah.
Sorry. You mentioned that maybe that you could just take it and move it west. So it's still on the northern ballpark, but it's on the west ballpark, not the east ballpark. Possibly there might be a space there. And I know that he said he didn't want it south, so maybe that might be an option. Could we possibly consider that swath of property as well? Maybe the park could look at that. I understand there aren't as many trees, but if you're going to have to plant trees anyway, after taking some out, then they could be planted there as well. So that is one comment. My second comment is that that corner of the park is one of the quietest corners of the park. If you've gone down there, there's a lot of activity going in a lot of the other areas most of the time. This is one of the few places where people can go and be serene and have a sense of calm and you know, quiet, right? And a cell tower, unfortunately, kind of disrupts that. Just visually, we know that when we want to be quiet and serene, we want some nice visual as well. That's not a key thing, but that is something to consider. I will also mention that my home happens to face Nichols Park. And our main windows, I look out at a cell tower every day. And I notice it every day. And it is approximately the distance, actually it's further away than what that cell tower would be to our building. So in hearing the discussion, it seems that there are some possibilities to still make it work, to find a win-win. And I know that this is their preferred location, but he's mentioned that as you get more people, the demand changes. This is not a static demand. And so even though that's the prime location that they think right now, or the other one that they asked for, who's to say that if it shifts to the west ballpark, that may not become the prime location in another 10 years or 5 years, just depending on the other homes that are built, more homes that are built further west, and more demand in that direction. So I just think there's some other possibilities that could be considered that may still work for everybody. I'd like to see that happen. But the other thing I would like to say is that, yes, we have put a lot of investment into the buildings. We do bring revenue. And as business owners and as a planning commission, we would hope that you would stand by the business owners and support us as we try to bring more business to Kaysville. And so to have it spoken like it doesn't matter kind of sends a message that, yeah, we want your business, but only when we want it. Once you're in, we don't care. And I will just say that from other business owners, that is the sense that frequently comes from Kaysville City. And maybe you're aware of that, maybe you're not. But as I sit here tonight, I can already say, oh, I can see that somebody here is concerned about my business and our success, because we didn't have to build it in Kaysville. And then there are others, and I think, wow, they don't really care. We have a business, it's here, so I guess it's going to stay here, so we don't need to worry about them. It's disingenuous to those that have invested in the city of Kaysville to not take into consideration the impact that it would have. So I hope you will think about those things. We love Kaysville. We want Kaysville to succeed. We want it to be a great place. But I also think there's a way to make it win-win here, a way that can work.
I have a question for you. So do you own the whole parking lot behind your business, behind those buildings? Do you?
Yes.
So
It's all of that. See the dirt? Those
so
two
you guys
long
own all
buildings?
of that?
Yes, we own all of that.
okay, because I would much rather see a tower over there.
That would be great, like back there in that corner where it's kind of those parking lots meet or something. That
And I don't know if that would, yeah.
But I don't know if that's an optimum
that-
location.
it may not be a great location, but that's an option. I guess what I'm concerned about is that all the options may not be explored, and there may be some that will work for everybody, and hope that we could look at those.
So I have two questions. Lyle, can you zoom in a little more to the ball fields? So first question is, and then zoom up so you can see their building a little more. Okay. What are the areas where you're saying, oh man, it's really obtrusive in this area, but not as obtrusive in these areas? Like, show me where you're
You want to
saying.
speak to that? I will.
Here's a pointer.
Show us
or
the
something.
SWOT. What area is it intrusive in?
There you go.
Red button. Like a red triangle. There you go.
So our building's a two-story structure. Along this whole face here and here, we have second-story windows and really good offices. So anything in this space here, I would consider pretty intrusive to us.
Okay. And then second question. Tell me, like, tangibly, let's assume that it went where it was proposed.
Originally?
Yeah, as it's given to us today.
Oh, okay.
And we just approved it as is. What are the tangible detrimental impacts to your business? How is that going to affect your business?
So if I can give you an example, can you scroll up on it?
And if you don't mind, Aaron, just approaching the mic as well as you're addressing them.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I don't remember how to do this now.
The hidden triangle on it.
Right there. If you go up a little further.
Uh-huh.
So the city approved a conditional use permit right up here for a car dealership months ago, right there. We lease the buildings here. One of the most frequent questions we got from our tenants coming to lease the space was, what's going on here? It's ugly. We don't like it. It doesn't match what we're trying to do in the business park. What's going on? Because if I understand the parameters of the business park, if you own property, you were supposed to build a building within a certain time period. That didn't happen here. They were washing cars on the street. They were doing all that kind of activity that was not consistent with what people expected in the park. Tangibly impacted some of our interest here. It was something we had to overcome and address as people came to look at renting space from us here. I don't know if you have the same impact here, other than I can tell you everyone who comes to our building, most from out of state, say, we love it. We love the setting. We love the visual we have. We can see the mountains. You've got this park. It's beautiful. If anywhere we go within our company, this is where we'd want to be from an aesthetic standpoint. My opinion is if they look out and they see a cell tower right out the window outside it's not just the second story, it's the first story too. They look across the parking lot and the cell tower is going to be there. To me, that isn't conducive with the park and the environment that I would like my customers, my business owners, my clients to come in and see. It takes away from it. It diminishes I think the tangible value and the ability to sell that space.
And I guess, I've tried to look at both sides here, and I guess I'm coming down to I'm having a hard time saying that having a cell tower here is going to make you lose a tenant and therefore revenue. I think if a tenant from out of state is looking at this facility and it works for their square footage, it works for their other needs, it works for whatever it is, the location brought more regionally, and they like all of those things, but there's a cell tower, I just don't think the cell tower is going to push them away. And so I'm not entirely convinced that you're going to lose revenue and it's going to hurt your business or your income, rental income or leasing income because of the cell tower being there. I get that it's a visual impact. I totally agree with that, but I don't see how it affects your bottom line.
Will you lose tenants? Maybe not. Will I lose opportunity? Possibly.
And I guess that's my question. What opportunity are you going to lose?
If I had a high-tech user who wanted to come in there and they were looking out at a cell tower, I would say they probably wouldn't want that space.
Or they might say, hey, I'm going to have great reception if I have T-Mobile.
No, they'll bring in fiber from the street.
Oh, well, if that comes in, I guess.
And that's, that's their point. The reason there's fiber here was because we put fiber in that building. We put fiber in the building, then everyone says, hey, it's worth it. So they ran fiber all the way down that street. And I feel like, yeah, am I going to lose tenants? I don't know. But I didn't build the buildings with the expectation of having a cell tower across the street. I didn't build 2 stories with mezzanine because I had a cell tower across the street. I built it because I expected a park with a nice aesthetic view.
And I understand that, and I guess I'm dominating here, but I think what we have to look at is we have to say, look, cell towers are here, and they're here to stay, and they got to go somewhere. Nobody wants them anywhere. Is it okay where it's at here? I am sympathetic to the fact that it's an impact visually, but I don't, other than the visual impact, I don't see how it affects you monetarily, and that's my concern. And so I'm still not settled either way, but that's just, again, thinking out loud.
It's intangible, but there's an impact.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to quantify it. Could I potentially still lease the space? Sure. But is it what I expected when I built the buildings? No. I look down here on this corner, there's a big scoreboard already right there. I mean, the profile's there. There's nothing here. You've got lights, they're basically hidden by the trees, and then you put this canopy of cell tower above it. I just struggle with it. I just think there's got to be a better location that hopefully could meet the needs of T-Mobile and serve the purposes of the park better.
That's actually the struggle I'm having, but sort of on the opposite end of that. Again, if this park was standalone, there was nothing in it, I would have a real problem with the 90-foot cell tower. But we're talking about 20 feet above a dozen existing towers already. And I went on to Google Earth and looked at a walking view. All those towers stand up above the canopy. The canopy's not at 70 feet. It may be at some point, but those trees aren't completely mature. They've got room to grow. You look and you see 12 cell towers right now. They're called lights. And we're adding one on top of that. I don't know that I want 11 more, but I totally agree. If there weren't already a number of these towers that I think you can probably see just fine from the second floor, your people, have they complained about those light towers that already exist in the park?
They don't complain about the light towers because, one, they're not on until at night when my people are gone, and two, they expect them to be there. It's not, they're far enough away, it's kind of by the canopy. I mean, our biggest complaint is the park, we get people just parking, leaving trash and stuff all over in our parking lots, to be honest, and they'll come and we ask them, tell them, and we get some very obstinate people. But they don't complain about the lights because it's a ball game and they expect there to be lights.
And that's sort of to my point. They're expecting towers.
But 20 feet may not seem like a lot, but when it's above the thing, it's quite a bit. I mean, that's my opinion, but I think if visually, if you come up over the overpass and you look out over the park, you see all the trees, you see the buildings, it's a very nice thing. I think this tower will stand out like a sore thumb where it's at. I think you'll see it first, just standing right above the canopy there as you come over the overpass into Maverick. You'll see it just standing out like a sore thumb.
All right, thank you.
That's going to be
Appreciate
true most anywhere in the park, right? You'll see it coming over the overpass and just about anywhere you put it in the park.
The other consideration is, and this goes for a cell tower wherever one is placed, when it's not expected, you'll notice it. When these light towers went up, they were probably noticeable. You get used to it, you don't even notice it. I couldn't tell you where the cell towers are in Kaysville right now, and I'm sure I drive past one every day because I just don't notice it. Now, I get it that one's not out my window. I understand that, but you know, there's something to be said of electrical towers, cell towers. They just are part of life, and we don't see them as much, I guess.
We've been kind of going around for about an hour on this, which has been a great discussion because it's been our first one. And so it's been, I think, a healthy discussion. But unless we have something that moves this discussion along, do we want to, I don't want to hold anyone back if there's more comments, but does anyone want to make a motion on this, or do we want to have more discussion? Betty looks like she's got 3 things she wants to say, so. No.
One question, Lyle, when's the council going to consider the lease on it?
So I think that they don't meet on the 4th of July. I think they're doing a special meeting on the 2nd, which this won't be ready for. We don't have a recommendation.
So
the
it won't
agenda's
have to
already
be.
set. So probably the 2nd meeting in July, the 4th, and probably the 18th must be the date.
Before the council would consider it.
Yeah, and so there are multiple parts. So the council, again, you would do the conditional use. Their consideration would be with the contract, but then they would also function as the architecture review committee within the business park, and consideration of those components and those covenants that the city controls.
I'm going to the applicant, because I mean, if we vote on it and we approve or disapprove, whatever it is, say we don't approve it, it's pretty much dead. And it sounds like we're in concept, we're all kind of, I mean, looking at the things, we're almost, with exception of number 2, 7.2, we're, you know, that's a question on the detrimental impact visually. Everything else seems to conform, but if we determine that that's is a legitimate detrimental impact and it's denied, I mean, it's dead. It sounds like we've talked about potential options to move it, and even as you guys talked, you know, let's see if we can do a win-win. I'm wondering, is the applicant willing to, rather than withdraw a motion or withdraw the applicant, to maybe request be tabled to see if some of these other locations might fit within that line of sight and where you're at?
We've been through this quite a bit with our RF department. I'm always willing to go back and talk to them again, speak to the points that were made tonight. I think it's incumbent on the commission tonight to act on our application. You have to do that. You can deny it.
Yeah, I'm just
for
asking.
What reason? For what reason?
Basically giving you an opportunity before.
I'm sorry?
I was basically giving you an option or opportunity before a motion's made and voted on.
I guess I'm missing your point.
Well, if we deny it, you can appeal to the planning or to the city council, but if it's denied, you can't bring it back for at least a year.
But you also have to deny it for a reason. You have to
Yes.
give us a reason.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well, and
See, and I think that would be tough. I think we can require them moving it as mitigation.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll just maybe just kind of support what Gary's saying. If we're just saying if we did do that, and we don't know what the decision is going to be, but if it was denied and there was a reason, and that reason would be there's a detrimental impact here that we can't address, and that's the height at this location, then you're left with coming back. Is it 6 months or a year, whatever it is?
I think it's a year, isn't it?
So
They can appeal to the city council, but It's
Let
right
me
there.
check on it, because there are provisions within our ordinance specific to rezone requests that limit their return within a year.
Oh, so this could
I'm
come
not
up.
certain
not
it
for a
restricts them
conditional
on a
use.
conditional use from returning.
For administrative
Um,
decisions, yeah.
So,
But I think,
I would agree.
so if it could come back, then this point might be a little moot, but I think what Gary's saying is if it could move 100 yards in a different direction that creates somewhat of a win-win, why wouldn't you want to do that, I guess is what I'm saying. And maybe that's what, is that what you're
because
saying?
I'm saying,
Well, and that's-
you know, we want a win-win, and it sounds like there's questions on that one point that could be interpreted as a detrimental impact. And so rather than flat out denying it, I'm saying, can we look at other options with different locations that still may, I mean, no matter what, you drive over, you're gonna see a tower. If it's on the west side, the
Yeah,
north side, the east side, the south side, you're just gonna see it, but the detrimental impact is the neighboring businesses, at least from some of the discussions we've had. Now, again, that's up to interpretation, it's speculative, but that may be something that some may determine is enough to deny. So I'm basically saying, you're saying, no, we've got to act upon it, but rather than act, I was saying, use the applicant. Would you be willing to look at other locations? I know they picked the best spot, but how many spots did they actually look at with their line of sight? Did they say, hey, this is our best spot, let's look at it? Or if we moved it around to the east side, like has been discussed a little bit, what's the line of sight there?
And when you say moving to look at other locations, you're saying still in the park, is that right?
Yeah, still within the park. No matter what, you're gonna see it. I mean, I personally, cell towers are ugly. Doesn't matter if they're 70 feet, 90 feet, 120 feet, but they're a fact of life, they're a fact of business. We have ordinances that govern it and guide us, and we have to live by those ordinances. But I'm just asking, is there a possibility to look at another location, or are you saying, no, we need this is the location, you take an action tonight, either deny it or approve it?
Well, let me clarify something. I don't see how, if you deny my application, you have to give me a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you deny it, what prohibits me from putting another application in for another location?
Right.
No, there's nothing.
I agree. But that's
There's
why,
nothing.
I wouldn't see that we would deny it. I think what we could very well do is say, we feel like the cell tower is acceptable in the park, somewhere.
Yeah.
But
We're not necessarily approving
I
this
still
location, but we
question if we
grant the
can do
conditional use
that.
permit. We might even say around the perimeter of the ball field. And then we leave it to the city, the applicant, and the property owner that's here to come to some kind of an agreement, a conclusion among themselves where that best location
But in
is.
essence, aren't we, I mean, we're denying the location, we're
No,
approving the
not
concept, but
necessarily.
we're not.
We're saying it's acceptable anywhere in this perimeter.
Except here.
No, we're not even saying that. We would say it's acceptable there.
Lyle,
Then why would they move it? Why would he move it?
Yeah.
Because Mr. Rasmussen, I bet, is going to go talk to the city council.
Lyle, what authority does the Parks Department have in where we locate this? Because you met with the Parks Department and they said, we don't like it here, move it. And so they picked another location. So if we pick another location, can the Parks Department come back and go, nope, we're not going to allow it because we have control over the park and you have no say, and we just won't let them put it there? Can they do that? I honestly don't
Sure,
know, because
I
they
think
already
they
told
could.
him, we don't want it by the volleyball court, which was the preferred
Essentially,
location.
yes, the property owner of the city can say nay to
Sure.
alternate locations, and I suspect they would weigh heavily on the Parks Department and their consideration. So the council would be the true authority, but yeah, I would hope they would lean on the Parks Department and its impacts to them and their expertise.
Josh, when you said that cell towers are a reality and nobody likes them and they're going to go somewhere, they have to, and we live with it. That's why I say, all right, fine, we've got a cell tower, it's going to go somewhere in the park. We recognize that. It's acceptable to us that there's a cell tower somewhere in the park. Now it's up to the city as the owner of the park, the applicant is the owner of the tower, and the property owners around it to work out where they're going to put that. We say it's fine somewhere in the park. They can figure out where they want to put it in the parks.
So I guess that works if you're adding the second part to it. In other words, your condition is that the city, the applicant, and an adjacent property owner has input on the location. What if they can't come to an agreement?
It's not our problem.
Well, if we make a motion that way, it puts the decision-making power on the three of them, and if they can't come to a decision, then what?
It puts the decision-making power really on the city because they're the owners of the property.
Okay. Well,
Was back to my original point, we can approve it contingent upon the city coming to an agreement with T-Mobile.
well,
It doesn't necessarily
that's
have
not
to be in
location-wise.
this. Well, it doesn't have to be this exact spot. We can simply say we approve it
That's
within
right.
the park.
That's why I
Now,
say
city
it's
council
acceptable
figure out
anywhere on
where it's
that
gonna go.
city park property.
But isn't the application for that specific site?
It
Because
Sure,
just
but-
says 940 West.
It is, that's what they're
Sportsplex
asking
Drive.
specifically for that
Okay.
location. But we have the option, as Josh has pointed out, because we're looking at the mitigation,
Okay.
saying, you know, it doesn't have to be right at that location. It could be anywhere in the park.
So our conditional approval could be based upon it not going there, just say anywhere else except in
No, I
this
wouldn't
area.
even say accept, I'd just say it's acceptable anywhere in the, perhaps
And
in
the
this
city
perimeter.
determine
The
what is
city
the
would
best
decide where
spot.
they're gonna put it.
Okay, so we're just saying, yes, the conditional use is, yeah, you can stick one in the park somewhere, okay.
Can I just say a couple more things? You have a valuable business owner here, probably a resident also, and that's important for sure. I just want to point out that our property rights are vertical. We don't own our view shed. And so
No,
you're
I
giving a
agree.
lot of credence to
Understand.
him, and you should, but it's one person. So if we move it on the other side someplace, you may have 5 people come in and say the same thing.
Sure.
So it's complex, it's always a balance. Thanks
Yep.
for your help, because it's very hard.
It is, you're absolutely right, and that's why I say, when I get back to that point of saying, we know cell towers are gonna go somewhere, and there's a proposal here to put one in the city park.
Yeah.
Are we really that concerned about exactly where it goes in the city park? Somebody's gonna be unhappy with it, no matter
Yeah,
where
no
it
matter
goes
where
in
it
the
goes.
park.
And that comes back to my point, and it's not that I don't care, it's, I'm looking at the ordinances and what we're bound to, and when I looked at it initially, I thought that it actually meets them. Then Josh brought up, you know, the potential of number 2 there, 7.2, having a detrimental impact. And I look at that and go, yeah, I don't like looking at a cell tower every day too, that I do. I'm like you, I look at my door and I see it. But what is that detrimental impact going to be? And that's really subjective, because we don't know what it's going to be. And so in my mind, I'm going, we're almost bound to approve it. But again, I'm like you though, I don't really care where it's at in the park, which area it is. It's going to be visible, it's going to be seen no matter what. You know, can we mitigate it by moving it around to one side? We might be able to. But again, it's
Then there's
the
other
the
impacts.
impact that is
Parks and
still
Recreation says that.
subjective.
It is. And that's why I say if it's that subjective, then you let the parties of interest work it out.
Well, my concern with that is, as has kind of already been alluded to, if we say we will accept it anywhere in the park, number one, why would they move it from here? Just keep it here.
Yeah.
Number two, if it moves east and we've left the discretion of where it goes within the realm of these 3 parties, and it does get moved east, and then someone over on the other side of that street objects to it, now they don't have a notice, they haven't been able to have input like the Rasmussens have, right? So then it creates that problem. If it gets put somewhere else, then it gets put in without due process in some respects.
What kind of notice was given on this, Lyle?
So the conditional use or notice is just posted notice on the property, so we have those yellow signs that were, I think we just posted the one closest to this proximity, which is essentially on Sportsplex Drive, north of the site.
Could I make a recommendation? You don't have to approve or deny, you can table it. Why don't you table it I'll use that time, I'll go back to the engineers, I'll talk to them and say, what are our options besides where we've applied for?
like
Can
that.
I come to you and ask you for an option in your backyard? You said you'd rather have it in your backyard.
That's my question. Why does your tower have to go on city property? Why can't you buy private property and build a private building? Why don't you buy private property and put a tower on?
I'd be glad to rent a spot in your backyard. Can I?
Have space, I'll lease it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, done.
Well, no, I'm serious, I'm serious. I would like to make that as a consideration. And we will look at other opportunities in the park and have a conversation.
And that's actually what I wanted to suggest in the first place, but I didn't think that might be something you all would want to do. But since we seem to have time, since the city council's not going to take action on this lease probably till the middle of the month, it may give you time to all get together and talk and decide if there is another location between you as the applicant, the property owner here and the city, who owns the property where it's currently being proposed.
And if we're going to do that, I would like to go on record to say that if we're looking at other areas, I would like to look at other areas other than the park. As planners, I just hate to see that we give up something when we may have other areas around, so that could work.
I agree with you.
Absolutely.
A great recommendation. I think that there's lots of other areas that it could be, and like I said, I'd much rather see it in your parking lot somewhere, in your business district, than the park.
I mean,
So,
if that happens, then of course, the city council doesn't have to have anything to do with it.
Right.
Right.
But it would still come back to us for the conditional
would.
use.
And I think that does go to the expectation. You expect to see a cell tower in the middle of a commercial park or a
Right.
business park where you don't in the middle of a park.
You do, they're all over, everywhere in parks.
And I actually agree with that.
Yeah, I do too. They are on a lot of parks.
I know they're there, I just don't think you expect to see it there. I'm surprised, honestly, I walk in and go, dang, when did they put that there for? I expect them at a school, I expect them in a business park. It surprises me when they're in a public park. Doesn't mean they're not all there, it just surprises me. I'm like,
And we
well,
don't
maybe
have
not.
a lot of them.
Yeah, and if we don't
And
have
this is
to,
our
if we have
first.
other good options, I think we need to pursue those options
Yeah.
and at least investigate it. We may come back in a month and go, you know what, we looked at everything, we couldn't work anything out, there's just nowhere else, this is it. Then at least we've gone down that road and looked and realized that road is a dead end, and we can come back and I think we'll all feel better about there really aren't any other options. We can't go further west, we can't build between your buildings. Okay, then I think we'd all feel better about that decision. So
I agree.
if we're good with that, and there's no other comments, do we have someone who would like to make a motion
To
on this
table.
particular item?
I'll make a motion
If
to
tabling it is what you want to do.
table a conditional use permit application for a telecommunications tower for Rock Future T-Mobile at Barnes Park.
Second.
Aye.
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 All right, that has been tabled. We appreciate you all being here this evening and your
Thank you.
input. It's important, and we truly do value our businesses here. We're not trying to scare people away from Kaysville. We love having you here. I apologize if you've had bad experiences in the past with Kaysville. We do try and look at everyone within the city and how we benefit everyone. And I felt a little bit like recusing myself because I have T-Mobile and I'm thinking, woohoo, I won't have dropped calls. But, it's one of those things that cell coverage, even when we have fiber, is going to be important because we love our phones. So, Rock, we appreciate you being here this evening and being flexible with us.
Thanks to everyone, appreciate it.
All right, item number 6, an ordinance amending chapter 17 through 32 off-street parking and loading of Title 17.
Okay, so we have discussed this briefly, but previously as a commission, so I'll just go over it very quickly. Currently, our ordinances on a residential property only allow a driveway to be 30 feet in width. And I think it's almost verbatim stated last time, the 4-car garage is the new 3-car garage. We're seeing wider driveways, people with interest in having wider curb cuts to go with them. We reviewed it internally as staff. We feel within a residential situation that it is appropriate. We don't see that it creates any problems either with traffic, backing, the stormwater system, and the cuts in our curbs, and ready to recommend consideration to the Planning Commission. The ordinance itself has about maybe 2 lines of text change. It literally changes 30 to 40. So other restraints and provisions remain the same with that. And that is the request. It is a public hearing this evening. I'll remind the chair to open it up for that. And beyond that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. This is a public hearing, so we will open the public hearing to anyone who'd like to speak on this particular item. And it appears we have no takers, so we will close the public hearing. Discussion, questions, concerns?
Sounds, I mean, if it works for the
Yeah.
city public works and they don't see a problem, I would move that we recommend to the city council approval of an ordinance amending chapter 17-32 off-street parking and loading to allow for wider drive approaches in the residential zoning districts as recommended by staff.
Second.
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. Okay, item number 7, an ordinance amending multiple chapters of Title 17, Planning and Zoning, to designate where major home occupation C businesses are permitted and establish the process by which they are to be considered.
Okay, again, probably very quickly through this. We've previously worked on the home occupation C definition. What that is in short is a few of the home business application types that you had previously been seeing as a planning commission, and we outlined just a few specific would be dealt with administratively rather than through the conditional use process with the planning commission. Hair salons was one of the big examples that you see regularly, so we established some criteria for them, move them to staff administrative action, but we hadn't placed within the districts where those are permitted. So this just wraps up kind of the tail end of that, saying we now have a definition of the use, and this puts them in as a permitted use in our residential zoning districts and agricultural zoning districts. So now they have a home where they belong. So with that, I'll turn it to the commission and again remind the chair is the last one. It has been noticed for a public hearing this evening.
All right, thank you. We will open the public hearing on this particular item for all those who are interested in coming up and talking about it. And we will close the public hearing for all those that were not interested in talking about it.
Man, everybody just cares, don't they?
They are a very trusting group, just letting us run wild up here with whatever we want, apparently. Discussion, questions, concerns?
We talked about this before, and
Yeah.
it really seems the right way to go.
I agree.
I mean, I think the implication in all of our discussions was that it was going to be in all the residential zones, and this is just saying that. So I think that ends it, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, can we get a motion then?
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we recommend approval of an ordinance amending multiple chapters of Title 17 Plan and Zoning to designate where major home occupation C businesses are permitted and establish the process by which they are to be considered.
Second. Aye.
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 Thank you. All right, item number 8, work session.
All right, so let me just start off with a question to the Planning Commission. So we're nearly 9 o'clock. This isn't necessarily something we have to wrap up this evening. I'd be happy to dive into it at any level of detail that you'd like to go into. I could probably go between us with some of the updates and information, and I would imagine additional discussion for quite some time. If you would like maybe just a 20-minute overview. I don't know where you want to go with that. Anyway, I'm just asking your direction, Mr. Chair and Commission, on how much detail you'd like to go into this evening.
If I can make a comment, prior to us starting this evening, Betty actually asked me, once I get my plaque, can I just leave?
She actually wanted to make a motion to adjourn right after that, I think.
I didn't want to make the comment on the city
I
council.
echoed her comments and thoughts and thought, dang, that sounds like a great idea.
He would make us leave.
So I think in the interest of time, as it's almost 9 o'clock, I'll leave it up to the future group here that will continue on, whether you want to have this discussion with future planning commission members, or you want to delve into it deeply with us, who are about to bid you farewell.
Well, I think we definitely should get your thoughts on it, because you've been here.
You've got the
and
experience.
you've got some background
They
and
can be brief.
experience.
Gary, as our most experienced, do you want to weigh in on this?
I have thoughts. No.
Perhaps.
I wouldn't mind just taking a few minutes and just kind of updating on where we're at. And sorry, Betty.
Yeah, well,
Just
why
kind
don't
of
we do
feel,
that
'cause
then?
I think we're,
You are
even though
free
we're
to just
gone,
get up
we're
at any
gonna-
time and you got your plaque. You're
Well,
good to
let
go.
me tell you, after our discussion, I'm wondering if I don't want to stay here. This has been interesting.
'Cause
So.
I think, with, the Senate Bill 34 that was passed, there's a lot of things with that, and I'm curious to see really kind of what the thought process is, how we're going to move forward to comply to that, and what you guys have talked about, come up with. And I don't think it warrants an hour discussion, but, maybe give us a flyby of where it's at, and then kind of go from there is what I'd say, if we want to give input or talk about it. But it's going to be an ongoing process, I think, for a little bit.
Okay, yeah, we'll give the brief overview. If you want to dive into something, stop us, ask for details, and we'll go forward with that. So just in short, what we're come prepared with is, I don't know that we've got strong recommendations as to here's what we're doing. Mostly what we've done is we came up with about 10 out of the 23 items in our last meeting that we thought might be of interest to get a little more information on. So we're mostly just prepared to talk a little bit more on some ideas on how some of those may work. And that's where it could take some time to go over different things and things we found with other cities and ordinances. The one thing I do want to get for certain, no matter how much time we spend everywhere else, I know it was of interest with the Planning Commission to somehow involve the public with this as we move forward before a recommendation is made by the commission in whatever form. And so I wanted to talk, and again, I know we have half a commission that will be around for this in an official capacity, but regarding possibly doing a open house with the public, I'm anticipating probably mid-August. So I don't know if those who will still be on might take a peek at their calendar. And we may have more ideas that come to fruition as it gets a little closer, but I've currently talked about at staff, is pick mid-August. Reason being, before school starts, hopefully that makes it a little easier for people to come. It gives us some time to work through a few details as a commission in preparation for that. It also will give us some time to notice it and put some things out to the general public. So the marquee, Facebook. One of the reasons I like that date is we can get it in the city newsletter and let people know about it, which would come out the first week of August or so, and then hopefully get several people that would participate and talk with us about some of the options that are at least on the table for discussion. So I don't know if there are specific dates in your minds that work best for you, for those who are available. Technically, Planning Commission would be the 8th, the City Council is on the 15th. I mean, Thursdays are just probably not good. I'd recommend maybe a Tuesday or Wednesday, possibly the 13th or 14th, if there are dates that work better for anybody. Whether we want to say that tonight, if not, I might be tracking you down with the emails or phone calls to help narrow that down. But unless there's different direction with that or additional ideas, I think that's the direction we're heading, trying to get the public process and input. And likely, I think as a component of that, at the open house, again, details to be worked out, tables, boards, things to have some conversation starters and get some discussion with people. But Likely we would utilize Qualtrics that the city has access to, or SurveyMonkey, and do some online outreach as well to the community to get some input from them. So I think we can be pretty robust in the outreach. Hopefully we get a fair amount of participation and inclusion, and hopefully that helps you make a recommendation. So if there are things that you feel are missing that you would like to do, certainly we're willing as staff, and we just appreciate your direction and comments.
Lyle, so that open house would be to discuss moderate income housing or ordinances, or?
I think it would be specific to housing choices and affordable housing options, and what fits Kaysville. So educating the public as to, look, we've got these things that we need to consider. The state's telling us it's time that we need to start looking at these different choices and creating some different options. So helping them understand that there's a reason that we're considering it, and then I think further exploring with them what some of those options are, helping to gauge what keeps Kaysville's character and works with our culture and fits us, and may not be exactly what we have to date, but hopefully get some feedback from the public as to what they think is the right direction to further explore.
Yeah, because we're required by state code now to redo our moderate income housing plan. Y'all know that, by the end of the year, and that we have to consider including at least a couple of those items from the list.
Yeah.
So the question is, public, what do you think? Which of these strategies would you be willing?
Well, I think, well, like you both said, it's not just transparency, it's letting them know and understand, through the education, what the state is requiring.
Yeah.
We've already got some moderate income and, housing requirements, and whenever we talk about low income or moderate income housing, it's always kind of a hot topic, an emotional topic too, and so I think helping them understand what Kaysville City is going to be required by the state to do, and then getting their, not just their understanding, but even their suggestions, comments, and how to comply and how to make it, and that's, to me, so critical. It'll make the job up here a lot easier and help the citizens understand it.
Well, and I think not just what's required by the state, but what the issue. I mean, it's an issue. Housing affordability is a problem right now.
Yeah, I never thought a $300,000+ house be considered affordable.
Yeah.
Lyle, I'll assume that this has flown under the radar of the public, and we had no comment come to the city in regards to this plan at this point, despite the fact that it's all public and the state's requiring it and things like that.
I think the general public is not all that aware of it. I would suspect that. I've not been hearing a lot of comments. The development community very much is. I frequently hear from them, their interest in, as they're kind of considering what they want to do, why they want to do it, and they will cite these mandates. Two things. One, we may have just decided the date for you because somebody here is much more organized than I, and recognize that August the 13th, which is a Tuesday, is the primary election. So it almost forces us onto the Wednesday if we want to go that week.
What about the next week? No?
And then that's a possibility, I think. So I don't, that would go into the 20th and 21st. I don't know when school starts, and if that's as critical of a reason not to do it that week or not, but that's why we were considering the week prior. So you can do Fridays or other days. I just think that they become very difficult unless people are interested in when they'd rather be out having fun. But there are always conflicts on Wednesdays too. So that's why we do online outreach as well, and other opportunities.
I think this public involvement, this public input, this open house or whatever we're doing is one of, if not the most important part of the process.
I agree. They need a voice. They need to have that opportunity. We need to have that opportunity.
Okay.
Is there any mailing with, do you still do utility?
I guess you do.
Or the newsletter.
Yeah, so with the utility bill and stuff goes out with the newsletter, that's what we were thinking, and I've reached out to, and then he's actually on his own, I think, been considering this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Councilmember Page, but I think he was interested in perhaps doing something that spoke to this a little bit as the message within the newsletter that month, and so it kind of just feeds into this anyway, and then we could talk about the date of a meeting and encourage people to attend and explore it further. So it seems to flow in well with the time frame on that. Yes, that would cover the utility bill on the mailer. It's possible, and I could speak with the council about doing something separate. If you're like me and you get your bill electronically, you don't always see the newsletter. So we do have people who have signed up that get our planning commission agendas that have through our website, so that they're interested in planning commission issues that we can feed information to. And I think we would utilize every effort that we can, and we're definitely as staff not opposed to casting the net as broad as possible. We just have to get approval on some of the costs sometimes and those issues. Okay, so
Really good.
that's the key point. So we'll probably August 13th. No, look for the Wednesday the 14th. I think that may be the best that we can lead up to. And again, we'll just run through these really quickly. Dan, if you want to maybe start us off. We took the 10 items that the Planning Commission talked about last time. They're listed here. And I don't know that we'll go deep into really any one of them, but just talk maybe briefly about some of the things we saw with the rezone for densities and why that might be something to consider.
Yeah, well, in this list, we went through the ones you told us to circle last time. Let's start with A, and it's rezone densities necessary to assure the production and moderate income housing. I don't know, I've been around building for 20 years, being a building inspector for the city, and I've learned one thing: there's really no cheap houses, there's just big houses and little houses. And so I think the best way to start approaching it for moderate is to build like they used to when they didn't have money. Back in the old days, they built on little lots, little 1,000 square foot houses or smaller. And you can make really nice subdivisions like that, still keeping the densities of zoning places. With little PADUs and smaller homes with open spaces, little parks like this. There's zoning some places now where some cities, they're allowing denser zoning, like 6,000, an R6 zone that lowers from R8s, the smallest lots we have. They go to R6s, allow 1,000 or promote 1,000 to smaller footprint houses, 800 square feet. You start timesing that out by the $100, $150 a foot to build a house, and you come up with a lot less than the houses I was looking up on KSL today. It's 0.62 acres in Kaysville, 4,800 square feet for $689,000. And that's all just price per square foot for lot, price per square foot for house. So naturally, if you lower the lot size, you lower the dwelling size, you can get down to more affordable housing. There's another way to look at it. There's ADUs. These become two forms usually we see. Basically, we're kind of allowing for them now, but we're not calling them ADUs, and we're letting them be brought into the city. They're calling them pool houses. That's a detached building that could easily be modified into a dwelling. They're usually 800 square feet or less. A lot of cities will allow these. They mandate that they're smaller, usually 50% of the square footage of the main dwelling, or 800 feet. Some cities pick 450, and I've seen most cities usually keep them under 1,000 square feet, just so you're not building another mansion behind the mansion, so you're not defeating the purpose of allowing people to do this. Creates a smaller rent. Most of the people, or most of the cities that are doing this, require them to be either owner occupied main house or the accessory dwelling. They allow them to use the same utilities, so you'll run the same water, same sewer, same everything. You'll stub it off to the other houses. There's pumps, there's things that make it all work now. But that keeps the impact fees from going up on the system. Basically, you'll add a few more houses, but not as many, or you won't be adding laterals basically onto the existing systems. A lot of these houses are like building mother-in-law apartments and attached houses now, and we allow that in the city. However, we're not zoning for them to be legal rentals, basically. They're more of a mother-in-law, and we think we should start zoning maybe to allow more of a rental opportunity for these rather than just keeping it exclusive to family. These come in play like you can finish your basement and add rooms, kitchenettes, things like that. Allow families, small families to move in or whatever. You can do above, I've seen bonus rooms now. They put on trusses on garages. They allow little dwelling units above garages. Some are attached, some are detached. So they're also just building off and allowing like Airbnbs to be rentals in rooms without doing any modifications, just allowing people to rent out rooms basically. So there's different ways of approaching it with detached or attached, providing cheaper rent.
Yeah, we really think that based on the options that we talked about, again, you may have a different opinion and that's fine, but this is one that we kind of looked into a lot, is I think really to keep Kaysville the kind of same look and feel, as we have a lot of technically existing underutilized space within some of our lots and existing buildings. So that's when we talk about these ADUs is I think a really good option, and then perhaps allowing these smaller lots. What I'll skip through really quick, and I think this would be something of interest with the public. I think that R6 idea is pretty interesting, where now we skip from an 8,000 square foot lot, and we saw this with the recent Ovation Homes subdivision where they, I take that back, the one by Smith's that's still being tabled where there are townhomes, you jump from an R18 zone all the way to an R2, and there's a big gap in that density that's permitted from about 5 units an acre all the way up to 10, and there's nothing in between within our ordinances other than we regulate them through the PRUD process or development agreement. So there's a mechanism, but if you just had a zone that was out there, perhaps that would be a more palatable way to somehow bridge the middle between those two. Our ordinances allow all the way up to about 15.5 units an acre in the RM zone. Just to give you an idea, in this, if you can see here on the slides, let's skim through them quickly. Gives you an idea what different densities look like. So 4 units an acre, and you got quarter acre typical lots, bump up to 5. And what you'll see as we go through these, almost 6 units. There's so many different ways you can build them. You know, these are just examples, but 7 units an acre. You know, we have some development similar to this within Kaysville, 9 units. 10 units an acre, this would be like an R2 in Kaysville, townhome type development. You could also 15 units an acre. This is about the max that we allow. To give you some local examples, townhomes where the old Far West Motel was, that are being built currently behind Vasa, are a little shy of the 15, but right about there. So that's within Kaysville. But you know, you could have open spaces in them, or you could make them more urban. And there are different ways you can build even the same densities. So anything beyond this is not something Kaysville currently allows, whether or not it's Kaysville's appetite to explore these. But if you want product like this, we would need to consider some pretty drastic density changes within our ordinances. So 27, 28, you know, you get, again, 28, this is much lower than the last one. So it's spread out differently. So there are, again, different ways on how you could do it. 32, I think I stopped not too far after 34, 36. And you're getting a very quick look at these. So 59 to me seems extremely extreme for Kaysville, but you know, we had this report and we went all the way up to about 150 in different examples and figured maybe that was way too far to even even put on the table for you. But so you can look at all these things and what does that look like? What does it feel like? We could get more examples of similar densities and what that may look and feel like, and either you or with the public could say, yeah, we don't want to see that in a million years, you know, in this part of town, or you know, maybe this is more us, I don't know, but only in these areas. And so that could be a portion of this process. I think it may also be appropriate. I mean, I think the legislation's open enough where we don't have to necessarily even create anything new. We may just need to be more willing as a community to use the more dense zoning districts we have in place and actually implement them and rezone for them. So for consideration, again, please stop me if or add any questions on it. Mixed use is another kind of take on that. So these are more generic examples, but this is what we might currently allow within Kaysville is the horizontal mixed. Technically, we just zone properties different colors, and so part of it could be retail, part of it could be residential. You could have zones that allow the horizontal mix just within the same zoning district, or you can go vertical, where you have your ground floor retail or office residences above it. That's not something we currently permit, and doesn't necessarily have to be more dense, but it could be a housing option where you'll probably see more rental type space that may meet a certain need. That, again, so it's part of the legislation is looking at choices, but also affordability. So that just, again, provides more choice for people and potential affordability. In any one of these examples, you may have, you know, you probably have all traveled more than I, and so you can envision these areas, 800 square foot apartment in a high-rise building that sells drastically more than a 5,500 square foot half-acre lot here in Kaysville based on its context in San Francisco or Manhattan, right? So, I mean, those may be extreme examples, but density isn't necessarily a guarantee or a true indicator of a price point, but it's definitely creates that option. So you can gold plate anything, and you could create extremely expensive high density product, just as you could create very cheap low density product. And so again, I think as a community what we're looking to do is keep the option open. It's certainly more feasible to get more affordable with density, even though it's not guaranteed that that's going to happen. And I think that's kind of what the state's looking for is, are we just strictly eliminating the option that nobody could come even try it? Density could be a piece of that.
Lyle, you'd mentioned before that this has gotten on the radar of some developers. Has anybody come to you with any potential, hey, we'd love to, I mean, I see down here, partner with someone. Have they come to you and said, hey, we'd love to get together with you guys, here are some of our proposals for 59 units per acre or 18 units per acre, anything like that come to us yet, or even being talked about at all?
Oh, I get fun ideas all the time, so I always have to tread cautiously on that. But yeah, so I think a little bit different than maybe some of the partnerships that are discussed within this with state agencies or others on funding. But there is interest in developers on doing mixed use product, on doing higher density product within Kaysville. And I think if we had it in place, people would utilize it. That could be an option is, you know, more this speaks to our general plan than ordinances. Hopefully we have ordinances that are reflective of our general plan. But if our general plan stated, you know, that we were open to that and willing to do that, and in certain areas would explore it, perhaps when a development came in, then we could work on the zoning to accommodate and foster that particular use. Or we've talked about it as a commission in the past too, you set the table first, create the zone, put it where you want, and then that development comes. So it can happen either way. Yes, I've heard interest in multiple situations, and it's a bit tough to gauge on, is it an idea or are they serious about it? At least one in particular, I know they've been talking to property owners about possible acquisition. So some are more serious than others in pursuing.
So if we zone it, they will come.
I think so.
Okay.
Maybe I'll skip right to the next item we talked about was dorm housing as one consideration. So I've reached out to Davis Tech and just talked to them, and is there a need that you perceive of having some housing available for students that come to your programs? And they don't have what I'd call empirical data on any of that. But I spoke with multiple people, student affairs and others, about the idea. Most of their programs are 6 months up to 2 years is kind of the max. The front desk said, I get calls all the time. I got a student coming there, where can they live? And so, kind of anecdotally, she said, yeah, I think if there was something close by, people would do that. They have one program in particular, that's their diesel mechanic program, that is a big draw from not just Utah. Primarily, Davis Tech is set up to help Davis County type students, but they get people from the western United States that come for about 6 months on a regular basis that they think, yeah, maybe some could be useful. They don't have any intentions on campus of providing student housing, but if the city, perhaps within the proximity, made it more possible for students to find housing close to campus, they see that as a benefit. So just to give you an idea, I thought this was interesting. They provided me with their latest master plan update, which is very recent. So they've got the Allied Health building currently under construction. This is the main building on campus, and the Simmons building. So I mean, they're going to get bigger, they're going to grow, they're going to have more students over time. It doesn't sound like they ultimately anticipate. There's a fair chance of perhaps like a 4-year community college type scenario. Is that 4 years? And it takes some people longer than others, but to get associates programs and things that may take place on here over time. But your Utah State or U of U and those types of degrees, it's certainly not on their radar that they would have those traditional university type programs out of here. So if we want to explore that, again, that's another option. Utah State Botanical Center, even less change will happen there. This is their master plan for the next 20 years, where they'll have some additional facilities as an extension campus. I don't think it's on their radar that they see a heavy need for housing for students. So much of theirs are students who already live in proximity that don't want to go to the other campus. And then they do a lot of online type training and programs as well. So it's not a heavy need, but it could be something of consideration. Again, if you felt something around this facility or this campus was desirable. And that's just an update on some of those questions. The last slide I have, although we could chat much longer about any one of these items, just as I reached out to schools, was Davis School District. So to give you an idea, I lied about the last slide because I skipped one. When we're talking moderate income housing, I know we talked about the numbers last time, but these are from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, numbers for income limits based on the city's average household size. You can see here $85,000 is the median family income, and you can take 80% of that, that's a $68,000 a year income. What can somebody afford at that rate? And so I thought it'd be interesting as I was reaching out to schools to check with Davis School District, find out how many employees they have within Kaysville. We've got, I think there are 13 facilities, high schools, junior highs, and elementary schools within here. And you've got 594 educators on staff, teachers, other additional service. I mean, there are a lot. I think it paints a picture. I don't mean to put them in a box, so to speak, but that's a lot of who we're talking about, or people in the community that perhaps there are multiple incomes in the household and perhaps they exceed those numbers.
Are these employees that work within Kaysville or live within Kaysville and potentially work somewhere else?
They were going to try and extrapolate that from their data, but it would have been difficult. So these are those who are employed within Kaysville. They may also live in Kaysville or they may live outside, but it just gives you an idea on people that at least work within the area and the type of numbers that there are, that they're probably looking for some of this product that we may be discussing that may or may not exist. So, there are quite a few people that could benefit from these housing options,
What part of
depending on what's
Kaysville is
considered. This is the Botanical Center ponds in winter. No. Yeah, and if you wanted to go through the others, I will maybe just say, and chime in, Dan, if I miss maybe anything that was critical. I think as we've perused the legislation further, and then I reached out to Wilf as well, maybe to solidify this. They have these income limits. We know the 80, 50%, 30%. We know that they've asked for different additional housing choices to work towards more affordability, but it's far from precise on exactly what that has to mean for us. And so I don't think that's a reason to be lackadaisical and do nothing. But I think that means really we can be quite open on how we look at these and what is Kaysville. Are we making an honest effort to address these and look deep into them on what's going to work for our city. So maybe more specifically, we don't have to provide exactly 300 houses that cost only $60,000 or something of that nature. We get to pick how that works for us as long as we can show that we've read it, we've interpreted it, we feel that we're meeting their intent, and we're looking at these specific options and implementing them within our general plan and working through that with their ordinances following up. So I think that was kind of one of the lingering questions, at least of myself, after our last conversation, is how specific, how much of a guarantee, the market's going to do to an extent what the market does to some degree, but are we at least leaving the options open and trying to facilitate those different options, I think is what they're really trying to target for us. So I'll stop there. Maybe instead of going into each one of the details, you've got kind of the staff report and can maybe chew on those items. If you have questions tonight, we'll stay here and answer those as much as you like. We can continue this at future meetings as well and dive deeper.
All right, thank you. Any discussion on anything? Any questions for Lyle?
I think Betty wants to keep going.
I think Betty wants to keep going. Okay. Thank you, Betty, for that input. Item number 9, call to the public. Our 4 publics, if you'd like to come forward, any of you, you're welcome to.
So I kind of came here to actually listen to this. I was kind of curious.
Could you state your name for us?
Yeah, sorry,
please, for the
Michael
record?
Halls, live on
Thank you.
75 South. Recently became aware of this effort through the Ovation Homes subdivision. And I'm a little concerned given the fact that I think the deadline is 12/31 and this is the state of the planning in terms of where we're at. I was kind of hoping that I would come to this meeting and I would see overlays with transit, economic forecasts, density obviously in terms of doing this kind of stuff has to go hand in hand with transit plans and infrastructure and impact and that kind of a thing. There is not a lot of visibility at this point. We've got another month, and I know that we've had obviously a lot of good work done by the city engineer, but have you guys considered bringing in a professional planning organization for the next month or so just to bring all of the ideas to the table? The reason I'm a little concerned is that, there's the developers who were always willing to come and put their vision of it, and I have found the recent experience that what the ordinance kind of says and what actually gets done a lot of times are in the developer's interest, and they're a lot of times ahead of the game for us. With the Ovation Homes subdivision, the common open space is a catch basin, which I never really thought would actually be possible in a PRUD in Kaysville based on the ordinance. So I'm very interested in it. I've got a lot of opinions. I think everybody does. I think there are a lot of people who would be very interested in kind of seeing what can be done. I love the idea of mixed-use residential, especially if it kind of preserves some of the nature of our historic district. I love the fact that, you know, accessory unit developments, you know, the mother-in-law apartments. We don't have a lot of land left in Kaysville, to be honest. And we can go out and we can put a huge amount of high-density housing in that area, and we're still not really going to address what we need. We've got a lot of areas, though, and a lot of these half-acre, acre areas where we can put more housing that fits the nature of the stuff. And we already house quite a few. There's a lot of multi-generational families now in homes. It's not uncommon in my area to have college students living in the home, you know, with the parents in terms of transient for years or more. They're always welcome into the neighborhoods. But to be able to go out and extend that to rentals and other things would be a kind of a good idea. And I want a really great plan for Kaysville. You know, I look at some of the stuff that's put up there, and I think all of those look great. They really do. But I wonder if do they fit in with our transit? You know, do they fit in with what the market will bear? Or will we find out that we create the stuff and the developers come, but they bring a much lower quality product than that is being represented in these meetings? So thank you for the time. I know it's late, and it was an interesting discussion on cell phone towers.
Well, thanks for sticking around for 2.5 hours.
But thank you much.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Anyone else? All right, we'll close the call to the public. I will make a recommendation. You obviously heard we're gonna try and have a open house and discussion group on this. Look for notification of that with the city, and we'd love to have you there and bring your ideas and your thoughts. And we want as many people and as broad the scope as possible, and as many minds. And perfect. All right, Lyle, other matters, reports, correspondence, calendar?
Yeah, just a couple quick items on this. Again, appreciate your service. This will be maybe my last time to officially put that on record. So Commissioner Wood and Bullock and Commissioner Parker, we appreciate all of you. I want to call you by your first name, but we'll keep that more formal. And our next meeting, so only half of you will still be here for that in July. We'll be selecting a new chair. So if there's any reason that you want to prepare yourself to advocate to be chair, next time we meet, you can prepare your speech. We tend to be pretty informal with that, but you go for a term of a year. We have 3 new planning commission members who will be here as well, and we'll vote for that next time. And speaking of next time, with the calendar items, I just wanted to quickly discuss the dates in July. Historically, we've often missed a meeting in July. Tends to be a busy time when people are out and about. Our meetings fall on the 11th and the 25th in July. We do have some applications, subdivisions and such that are interested in coming through. However, depending on your schedules, if there's known conflicts where we may not have a quorum, I'm looking at the 25th, possibly in particular being right after Pioneer Day, but the 11th, any concerns from the commission on when we may be holding meetings in the month of July?
So you're talking about July 11th for the next one? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if we could, you know, I'm available, and I think we're willing and happy to meet then. We just want to make sure, because I know it's traditionally there's been a lot of conflict with schedules, and I just know many times we've missed meetings. So just as we're preparing applicants and letting them know our timing, if there's a reason that's not doable for those who are present, let me know.
I'll be out of town.
Okay. We'll do some outreach then to the rest and check on their schedules.
Okay.
If there's nothing else. And that's all I've got this evening, so unless you have more, we'll wrap up our calendar.
Thank you. Item 11. Need a motion to adjourn. Betty, would you like to make one final motion?
I would like to adjourn.
All right. And if we don't see you later, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
All of those.